So yes, welcome to the webinar for the 2022 Tech Coalition Safe Online Research Fund. I'm Natalie Shoup. I'm the grant specialist with Safe Online Initiative of End Violence, working with the Tech Coalition on this collaboration for our research fund. This is the second year that we're doing this research fund, and we're very excited that you all are interested in this expression of interest that we have open right now. So what we're going to be talking about today is giving you a quick introduction to who the Safe Online team is, the Tech Coalition team, and our collaboration together that has had this Tech Coalition Safe Online Research Fund as part of that partnership. So we're going to go ahead and get started with introductions to the Safe Online Initiative, as well as Tech Coalition. So I'm going to go ahead and hand over to Miguel to introduce himself from our Safe Online team, and then we will continue on with more about the Tech Coalition.
Thank you so much, Natalie. Hi, everyone. My name is Miguel. I'm the Safe Online Grant Manager, and it's a pleasure to be here with Kay from Technology Coalition and Natalie, my colleague from Safe Online. Just to give you a little bit of background of what does End Violence Safe Online initiative do. We are mainly a vehicle to provide financial investments and also the type of support to the Safe Online community. We are focused on supporting projects and experts all over the world that to tackle online child sexual exploitation and abuse. And the main ways of doing so are these 4 pillars that you can see here on this slide. Via financial investments through grants, like the one that we are introducing with the request of expression of interest that Natalie was mentioning about, and this webinar is about. Also, we provide advocacy and partnerships development to the overall safe online community on different matters at the policy and strategy level when it comes to try to foster for a better environment to keep children safe online. These 2 main areas, the financial investments and our advocacy and partnerships development areas of work, have nurtured a network of different experts that we are in contact with, and that we are also using to connect with other type of practitioners and also other type of organizations in the ground that are interested to have this type of expertise that we can provide, or that we can connect them so that they can benefit from in their day-to-day. And also we provide knowledge and capacity development activities in the form of webinars, in the form of events, so that we can gather and foster collaboration, knowledge sharing, and cross-fertilization across different areas, across different organizations, as well as fields. The next slide is going to show you like the 4 main areas of investment that we are currently looking at. We are looking into projects that are looking for strengthening the capacity, the networks and systems at the national and at the regional level all over the world. We are also interested in developing technology solutions that help prevent, detect, or deter online child sexual exploitation and abuse in different platforms and areas. As well as we are very interested in generating robust data and evidence when it comes to tackling this issue. And both the technology solutions and the generation of robust data and evidence are the 2 pillars that are strictly connected to the request for expression of interest that we have recently launched jointly with the Technology Coalition. Also, we provide other type of ad hoc support to targeted initiatives when we see that there is a fit and there is an alignment with our strategic objectives on a specific projects that we see an interest in funding. Here you will see an overall the overall picture of our investments all over the world. As of today, we have funded more than 80 projects all over the world, with a total envelope of $68 million US dollars. This information is available on our website, and you will be able to find more about these grantees on the website on the same website where you can find the request for expression of interest. There is a grants directory that I will put now on the chat so that you can get get familiarized as well with the type of grants and projects that we are supporting. When it comes to advocacy, these are just examples of our recent advocacy efforts, gathering different actors and like-minded organizations in order to foster a better environment to keep children safe online. And as you can see, we have been very active at the UN level, but also at the EU level with the recent legislation developments, since these entail and they are getting out of traction, and they are considered like a benchmark in some other places when it comes to regulations to try to keep children safe online. Finally, I would like to just give you a snapshot of the type of knowledge sharing and learning activities that we organize. We organize webinars, we organize convenience, as well as we have a portal and newsletter that are available to all our partners, as well as obviously social media activities and technical support and coordination for specific ad hoc knowledge sharing activities. And now I would like to hand it over to Kay from Technology Coalition to introduce her organization. Over to you, Kay.
Thank you, Miguel. Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Kay Chow. I am the Director of Programs here at the Tech Coalition, leading our programs and services. Really excited to be here with the Safe Online team and to share more about Tech Coalition and our research fund. So just a little bit of background about Tech Coalition. Our vision is to envision a digital world where children are free to play, learn, and explore without fear of harm. We envision a world where children can be online without fear of harm in this area. Slide, please. And our mission is to unite the global tech industry to protect children in the fight against online child sexual exploitation and abuse. We're really the place where tech companies come together to combat this important issue. We are 27 members strong. Actually, hot off the press, Zoom just joined earlier this week, so their logo is not up here yet. But as you can see, we represent tech companies across all different sectors across the tech industry. So a bit of history about us. We did form in 2006, and in 2020, we launched what we call Project Protect. This is a strategic 5-pillar plan to reinforce our approach and really set up the foundation to support some of our long-term objectives. We've since built on that foundation, and these are the areas that we focus on. So at the top right, you see we drive tech innovation and accelerating adoption of technology in this space. Also on collective action, we engage with third-party stakeholders on policy issues surrounding global child safety. We also drive transparency and accountability within the tech industry. We are actually about to launch a voluntary transparency reporting framework in a couple of weeks. We also facilitate knowledge sharing across industry amongst our members. We host webinars, we enable mentorship within the industry and build resources for our members. And last, but certainly not least, we fund research so we can really understand deeply the problem in this space. And we do that in partnership with the End Violence team here. And so with that, I will pass it back on to the Safe Online team.
Thank you so much, Kay and Miguel. We're going to go ahead and dive into the research fund and how that builds on the work of both Safe Online and Tech Coalition and our collaboration together. So looking at the research fund from 2021, this was the first year that we engaged in this collaboration and launched our very first research fund. The objectives are similar from last year, however, they have been updated this year. So if you're familiar with the call for proposals from last year, there are some similarities, and we have updated the scope in some ways as well. So Safe Online Initiative and the Tech Coalition partnered to launch the Safe Online Research Fund last year. And in the first round of funding under this collaboration, 5 organizations were awarded grants for research to expand knowledge of online CSEA and explore the most effective measures for preventing it. The objectives in that round were 4 different objectives around efficacy and impact of online CSEA, evolving technology and the implications or considerations for online CSEA practice, and well-being, collaboration, and support for all those involved, in combating online CSCA, including survivors and content moderators, and enhancing collaboration among all sectors, and then policy and legal considerations. So if you want to learn more about the 5 winners of last year's round, there is more information on our Safe Online webpage. It can be interesting to look there at some of the interviews that the grantees participated in at the launch of their research projects. They elaborated more on several of the criteria that will be similarly evaluated in this year's proposal. And so taking a look there at some of their interviews and responses around innovation and applicability to industry is a really good resource, and also interesting to see how we can continue to build around our current community of grantees. If we look at this year, we have a really wonderful advisory group that continues to support this work and be engaged from the child protection sector as well as tech industry. We have a very balanced advisory group of amazing experts that have been highly involved in these processes since last year. The advisory group is involved in not only helping to define the scope of the proposal, identifying really urgent and relevant issues that we would like the research to focus on, but also in evaluating all phases of the requests for expression of interest and proposals. So if you want to take a closer look at who's involved in our advisory group, there's also been really wonderful opportunities this year for our current grantees to collaborate and engage with these different advisors in different ways throughout the process of their research. And that's a really core part that we continue to grow as we develop this research fund. If we look to this year's 2022 Tech Coalition Safe Online Research Fund, we see that we have 3 objectives this year: prevention and deterrence, detection and reporting, and response and support. And we're actively seeking submissions of expressions of interest at this time from nonprofit organizations. Those can be research institutes, academic institutions, civil society, non-governmental, and international organizations. We are accepting applications from all countries around the world. And consortia are also encouraged to apply, but the organization submitting the application will be considered the main grantee and should be a nonprofit. If you meet the eligibility requirements and the focus areas that we're focusing on this year for our research, we would love to hear from you in this expressions of interest phase. I want to dig in a little bit to what is different about this year's round and also the important main characteristics of the round. We got a few questions around timeline and some of the key milestones and dates around the process. The main deadline at the moment is our deadline for submissions of expressions of interest at the 31st of May. That's coming up in about 10 days. This is a 2-stage application process this year. So we're first requesting short expressions of interest that speak to the scope of the research proposal and how that fits our objectives this year, as well as the other scoring criteria that are elaborated in the request for expressions of interest. So once an expression of interest has been submitted, there will be a review by the advisory group of all expressions of interest, and then invitations for full proposals will be sent to successful expressions of interest applicants. We did have a question regarding the scoring criteria and how that aligns with the expression of interest application. There is alignment with the overall scoring criteria for the full proposal stage. At the expression of interest stage, we do not expect that you will be able to fully elaborate on all of the scoring criteria. That is more of a guide to understand what we'll be looking for in the full proposal stage to ensure that your research project would be a good match and you would be able to speak to those things in the full proposal stage if there was a request for a full proposal. Excuse me. At our expression of interest phase, we are looking that you can answer the questions in the application and speak to the different components that we've listed in the application form. So there's some pretty specific questions elaborated and components of each question. And if you're able to speak to those, as well as the different eligibility criteria that are elaborated, that is really what the expressions of interest will be evaluated based upon. So looking at the key dates here, we have our launch happened on April 19th. The submission deadline is the 31st of May. And then we have the invitations for full proposals will come in June after the evaluation by the advisory group of this first stage. And then the full proposal submission deadlines will be in July, towards July of 2022. So that means that if you are submitting an expression of interest, in the case that your expression of interest is successful, you would be elaborating your full proposal over June and July. So that's a good timeline to have in mind when thinking about submitting an expression of interest. And then we would announce winners towards the end of 2022. And that is when the research projects could commence once those awards have been granted. We do want to highlight a few documents, but looking at the Safe Online webpage is the best place to access all of these resources. We have full details, summaries of each component of the request for expressions of interest and this particular research fund call. We have all of the supplementary documentation that includes details on the application process and what is expected and what we're hoping to fund in this research proposal. So you can find the featured materials on the sidebar on the right here on our webpage. You'll see that if you pull that up, the webpage link is here, but you can also navigate to the In Violence Safe Online Research Fund page, and you would find it linked at the top there. So hopefully it's easy to find. If you have any trouble, please let us know. You'll find various sections: general overview, eligibility criteria, FAQ, and the advisory board members. And then the documents that are really, really important to look at are the request for expressions of interest, which has all of the details of the scope of this Tech Coalition Safe Online Research Fund, as well as a downloadable application form, which is for reference only. That is just so that as you're elaborating your proposal, if it is easier to look at the application form in that format and to download it to work with, you're able to do that. However, the application must be submitted through the online portal. There's a JotForm portal where you would click on apply here and it will direct you to the JotForm portal, and that is where your expression of interest needs to be submitted by the 31st of May. If you have any trouble, again, please drop us a note. We're very happy to help direct you there. You're also able to save and exit and return to your application form on JotForm. So hopefully that's helpful in elaborating your proposal as you go through it. Then we also have the eligibility details as a document in these featured materials, letting you know a little bit more about who we will fund if you have any questions about that. And then our FAQ form is available as well for you to submit any further questions, and we'll be updating answers to FAQs on that site. So if you submit a question, you should see your response answered there. Moving to the objectives of this round and a little bit more detail around what we're looking to fund. We have 3 priority areas as was described: prevention and deterrence, detection and reporting, and response and support. We have a lot of detail this year around these objectives that have been elaborated jointly with the advisory group. So those specific bullets that you'll find on pages 2 to 4 of the request for expressions of interest document have very great detail on the objectives and what we're looking to fund in terms of types of research that would be of interest and really important and relevant right now as defined by the advisory group. That's not to say that the details there are an exhaustive list. It's just trying to capture most of what we would see in each of those buckets as relevant, innovative, and applicable research to industry. Going forward, we have 2 funding streams available this year. So this is also something different from last year. Our 2 funding streams are a main funding stream, which are grants above US $50,000 up to $200,000 US. So those are the lower and upper limits for that grant funding stream. All eligible organizations that meet the eligibility criteria defined in the request for expressions of interest are able to apply under that funding stream. You just indicate in the form which funding stream you're applying to. We will be allocating approximately $600,000 to that funding stream, to the projects that we will fund under that funding stream. And all of the eligibility and scoring criteria will apply for that final full request for proposals. The alternative funding stream we have this year is for grants up to $50,000 US. So those are smaller size grants financially, but all organizations that are eligible are also eligible to apply to that. we just require that applications under this stream identify if they'd like to request tailored support for the development of their full proposal. So the idea is that we'd like to support those who feel like they might require extra support in developing their full proposal to meet the eligibility criteria in a strong way. We're encouraging underrepresented applicants to really think about this support and this funding stream, because the possibility here is for advisory group members to provide some tailored feedback to organizations applying under this funding stream to help in developing their proposal. So if we see a promising idea in the expressions of interest that meets our eligibility criteria and there's been a justification given for why tailored support would be needed, those applicants will be considered for some of our tailored support in developing full proposals. There will be slightly different scoring criteria in the final evaluation of proposals, and that will be evaluated at that later stage. So those pieces will be shared at a later stage. But for now, in the expressions of interest, just really be sure that you elaborate clearly in your application the request to be considered for tailored application support if you were successful in the EOI stage. Then moving to just a little bit of clarity around what we will not fund. We are really looking for innovative research that is applicable particularly to tech industry and that falls under one of these three core objectives. We have seen that general mapping, scoping, or data collection research proposals do not tend to meet the eligibility criteria for innovation. We're looking not to necessarily do a general survey or data collection effort around prevalence or how different aspects of online CSEA look in different contexts. However, if that is a first stage or really necessary component of research, that is certainly fine. However, the primary methodology and focus of the research should be something that is specifically looking at some innovative aspect, new piece of research, building on existing research with something very new, or something that is an intersection that is possibly not already existing in the field. So that's kind of what we're looking for in terms of innovation, and some of the proposals that we have seen in the last round that maybe did not meet some of the criteria for innovative research that we had laid out. Inviolate Safe Online does not provide core organizational funding, and the proposed research should not duplicate existing research. Documentaries, journalism, and oral history projects are also not eligible under this call for proposals. Multiple proposals with the same project lead name are not accepted. So the same researcher can appear on multiple expressions of interest or teams or in the full proposal stage. However, the project lead can only appear once per proposal. And then Safe Online will not extend more than 2 invitations for submission of a full proposal per institution. So you are welcome to submit more than 1 expression of interest per institution, per team. If you have multiple ideas that you would like to submit that are meeting the eligibility criteria and aligned with your current work, you're very welcome, and we would welcome seeing those submissions to see where your thinking is going and what ideas you are thinking about in terms of your research. However, this is to flag that ultimately, if there are invitations for submission of a full proposal, there will only be up to 2 per institution. Also to answer a question I've seen a couple of times that relates to this piece, existing or previous Safe Online grantees can apply, definitely. You are eligible to apply to our fund. However, being mindful that if there is no significantly new component of the research, or the research does not fully align with the new scope of these objectives, which is slightly different from previous rounds, then you just want to be mindful of that as you develop your proposal, because that would be considered in the assessment. Moving to eligibility. We are looking at the eligibility criteria that are elaborated in the request for expressions of interest. And you can see these laid out and dig into more detail in them. But just to highlight again that nonprofits are eligible to apply. Nonprofits from any country around the world are eligible to apply. And the research must address one or more of the 3 areas of our 2022 open call. We did get some questions about this as well. You are able to submit a research proposal that just meets one of these. That is completely acceptable and will be counted as a qualifying criteria. If it does meet more than one of the 3 areas, you're also welcome to indicate that. However, the only eligibility requirement is that it meets at least one of these areas. All funding will be directed to an institution, not to individuals. So institutions will be the grant awardee. It cannot be awarded to individual researchers. An individual may submit one proposal as research project lead, so we just elaborated on that. And at minimum, the applicant organization should have demonstrated relevant prior expertise and or research experience. So in the expression of interest, when we ask about team capacity, organizational capacity, it's important just to elaborate the capacity and demonstrated experience or expertise to be completing this research. We also ask that the organization complies with all relevant regulatory and ethical frameworks, including having a safeguarding policy in place or willingness to develop one. It is not required that you elaborate in detail on those frameworks and how you meet them at this stage, but to acknowledge that you do have them and you will comply with all relevant frameworks as needed. Going now to the scoring criteria. I just want to dig a little bit deeper in here, as we did also have some questions about the alignment. Again, this is the scoring criteria for this full request for proposals. We will be looking at similar questions to evaluate the expressions of interest. However, we do not expect that you have comprehensive, exhaustive answers to all pieces at this stage, as it is a very short expression of interest form. We do ask that in your expression of interest, you really dig into the methodology and specific outcomes and pieces of research that you'll be looking at. So we do not need at this stage a more general context of the field. We don't necessarily need the background on the state of the problem, but any relevant specifics about your particular context that you're focusing on that tie to why you're performing a certain methodology or why you see research as valuable in that context is very important, but more general information about the state of the field right now or how online CSEA looks in general, or the scope and some of those prevalence numbers is not necessary at this stage. Those pieces of how the problem looks that you're addressing will be required at the full proposal stage, but since there's limited space to speak to your idea around your methodology, we really want to dig into the specifics of your methodology and what you're focusing on in your research and why it's innovative, applicable to tech industry, and feasible, given the data access requirements, relevant regulatory frameworks, technology required, etc. Going through these pieces of criteria, I've highlighted a few, and again, we're going to make this recording available online in the FAQ page so that you have reference to it. So you'll see some of these pieces that are highlighted, but this was just to highlight some of the really key aspects that we'll be looking at in each of these categories. One of the main ones that we're highlighting is actionable research. So this is a piece that we really want to try to encourage applicants to speak to in their expressions of interest, is, if we look at the next slide, the actionability of research, especially for tech industry. So we will consider research that has applications to other stakeholders like law enforcement, hotlines, other NGOs, other types of organizations, governments. However, the priority and the really key focus is that there's tech industry applicability, and the applications really need to have some piece that can be tied to actionability for tech industry. So I think if we can go to the next slide, please. There is a few more details around, thank you, actionable research and what makes research useful in industry. So this is something that we will also post on the webpage under some of the useful materials to be sure you have more access to this. But what makes research useful in industry is not necessarily all of these things, but thinking about different aspects of this that could relate to your research project. So actionable suggestions or conclusions based on your findings. research focused on victim or offender experience or pathways, and that has at least some connection to the online experience. Research focused on developing new technology that includes some pathway for use by industry, such as licensing, open source, etc. And then research focused on deterrence, early intervention within the online experience, or other aspects, reporting and detection, or response and support. So making sure that you are speaking to some of these aspects as you connect it to the usefulness for industry. Looking at our eligibility and scoring, we have, oh, I think go back one. Thank you. So our deadline again is the 31st of May. I'll just keep raising it so that we make sure everyone has that date in your head. End Violence will assess the expressions of interest per similar criteria to the full proposals. So again, the scoring criteria elaborated is for the request for proposals, but we will elaborate them on a similar basis, and really keeping in mind the really specific components that are asked in each section of the application form. Again, it's not expected that expressions of interest will cover in depth or provide full details of each criteria, but specificity and clarity will really be assessed at this stage. Not necessary to elaborate the state of the field or the scope of the problem being addressed in general terms at this stage in the expression of interest, but rather speaking to what aspects of online CSEA you are specifically addressing or seeing a need for your research would be really critical, and then the specificity around your methodology and outcomes. We will have in the assessment of this expression of interest, the full advisory group involved. They're involved in every stage of the definition and evaluation of proposals. And we will make sure that we are answering questions up to the deadline for submissions. It is the 31st of May at midnight Eastern. And again, you need to apply online at our portal, so our drop form portal, which you can find on the Safe Online webpage, the Research Fund webpage. There's a button to go to the drop form. It's also linked in the request for expressions of interest, and you'll see the form there. Make sure that you aren't just saving, but you're also submitting. And if you have any problems with that, again, please reach out. Submissions are only accepted in English at this time, and we are also happy to try to answer questions in other languages, but questions in the FAQ form should also hopefully be submitted in English so that we can ensure we can respond to all of your questions at this time. We want to make sure that we have a little bit of time to answer any questions that we've been having. I see that we have quite a few questions in the chat. I hope that we answered some of them. Definitely really appreciate all of your comments and questions and your interest in this application. I'm going to go ahead and look here to see if we can make sure that we speak to any of the application pieces before we speak a little bit more to the actionability of the research and what types of research are really fitting the criteria that we've proposed here. So a few questions I see, for example, are related to what types of research will be considered. So if we can go back actually to the eligibility criteria. Yes, exactly. No, that was great, perfect. So this is great. So here, again, this is the overview of actionability, but if you go to the request for expression of interest, there's much more detail around what types of research we're considering. And so we really have laid out really defined different cross-cutting components of the research that we'll be interested in. And we hope that you'll take a look at that to get a better sense of what pieces of the work we'd like you to speak to. However, we are accepting all types of research: quantitative, qualitative, mixed methods research, action research, pilot interventions, if they're meeting all of the eligibility criteria. We also had questions around tech solutions as part of the research. So if you need to use existing technologies versus if you could develop new tech solutions, we do consider that in the research proposals. However, we would just want to emphasize that priority is given to the research aspect and funding the research aspect of any proposal. And so as long as there's a significant research aspect that is part of that solutions development, that can be within the scope of this proposal. However, only the development of a tool itself would be out of scope. So please, again, if you have an idea that you feel that some component of it would fall under this scope, please do submit an expression of interest and clarify which pieces you think would be part of the different steps of your research project. I also want to go ahead. I think we've answered quite a few of the questions about application process itself and the timelines and the different documents required, as well as eligibility. I'm going to go ahead and welcome one of our Tech Coalition advisory group members. Alicia has joined us today to help answer a few questions as well. So Alicia, I might let you introduce yourself, and then I'm going to just gather a couple of the last questions we had for us to all answer. Oh, I think that you should hopefully be able to come on now. I apologize. I think you were. There you go. Thank you.
Sorry, it said
it's my fault.
Disabled video. Hi everyone, it's really nice to meet you. I'm Alicia Blum-Ross. I am the head of Kids and Families and Youth Strategy at YouTube. And in that capacity, I work across our products, trust and safety organization, across Google, working on issues related to child safety and kids and families experiences online. So both our efforts to prevent, deter, detect, report child sexual abuse and exploitation, but also, our efforts around surfacing high quality content that helps kids learn and create online as well. And obviously we all know in this group that if we don't do the former, we can't realize the benefits of the latter. So I'm super excited that there's a group of researchers looking into these issues. I currently chair the research committee of the Tech Coalition, and have been our kind of, I guess, inaugural chair over the last couple of years. And that's partly because I am a former academic myself. I was a researcher and an instructor at the London School of Economics and Political Science for several years, working in the Media and Communications department. I come from a social science background, so my PhD is in anthropology. So different from some of you who may come from, a variety of different disciplinary backgrounds, but very much dedicated to the project of making sure that we have great evidence to inform our programs and policies in industry, and making sure also that there's great channels of communication between folks in industry and folks in the expert and research world. So I think I'm mostly here to answer questions, Natalie, or did you want me to say anything?
Yes,
okay.
That would be great. Thank you. We have a couple that I think would be excellent. If anyone, Kay, Miguel, or Alicia, you would like to add here. One that I just explained a little bit, but it would be great to get a little bit more clarity around, because we've had lots of questions related to what qualifies under this research. So I gave our general, we accept qualitative and quantitative and mixed methods research, but a little bit more clarity around what types of research we're thinking about, and especially I think how that intersects with innovative research. So we specified a little bit the difference between perhaps some of the applications that we saw that didn't meet the eligibility criteria for innovation when it was more general data collection on the state of the field. But if there's more clarity, we can give a little bit around what we mean when we say innovative research and what falls under that.
I think one question, obviously, depending on where you're situated and what institution you're in, obviously the way that you're evaluated on your research might change a lot depending on your institutional context. I know that when I was an academic, a lot of the success was really around journal articles and impact on the research field. Here, I think the big question to ask is really like who or what entity could take away lessons from your research. And so, last year we had a lot of proposals, for example, that were around schools-based education, or what governments could do. And I think that's really fascinating and obviously crucially important to this field. But that is probably not the focus of this particular fund. So the question is, can someone working in the tech industry learn something, do something, gain a kind of piece of knowledge from reading your study? And I think there's two ways of thinking about that. One is, what are your research questions, first of all, are your questions pertaining to something in relationship to the use of a digital platform, in relationship to the use of a particular kind of technology, in relationship to the way that platforms may like coexist within a kind of a wider ecosystem. So that's just one. Two is also, are you able to present any kind of takeaways or actionable recommendations or, kind of like key findings. Sometimes even like case studies can be very like evocative and useful for those of us who work in industry. And then I think the third question is also, do you have any experience of working in research practice partnership context? Because, I think academic journals, well, I would read them. A lot of my colleagues probably will not. And so we also do want to see in these expressions of interest, like how you're going to approach the role, the sort of the translation. And do you have some experience of saying like, hey, we also will do a report, or we'll, come up with some recommendations, or we'll, we plan to, we have some experience working with, NGOs or other tech companies or even governments to say, okay, these are our recommendations. So I think we do want to see some thoughtfulness around how you intend to kind of like get the key findings across to an audience that are not academics and are not necessarily like, used to reading that kind of style of presentation. So that's some overall thoughts. I'm happy to answer further questions as well.
Incredibly useful. Thank you so much. I think that one other big question that definitely would be useful to hear a little bit more about is the actionability for tech industry. So we reviewed a little bit what does actionable research mean, but I think getting even a little bit more concrete, we've also directed people to check out the interviews that our current grantees have completed, where they elaborate a bit on how their projects apply to tech industry. I think that can give a little bit more idea of some examples of how they're looking at those pieces. But if there's a little bit more you could speak to about how applications to tech industry look and the opportunity for that.
I think one thing that some of the successful projects did last year really well was they actually kind of were pretty knowledgeable in some ways about how platforms work. And so they honed in on sort of specific areas of work. So for example, we had a research project around deterrence, right? And they acknowledged that, for example, many search engines now, Google amongst them, have deterrence messaging that surface when an individual may be searching or entering search terms. And actually, maybe individuals seeking out this content. It actually also may be an individual trying to report this content. So there are certain search terms that will trigger like a kind of a one box in detection. And actually, this is something we've been doing in industry, some companies more recently than others, but there's not a strong evidence base about whether or not that's like a super effective mechanism, because it's something new and no one's really had the opportunity to study it yet. So they really were able to kind of say like, this is a part in the kind of what we would say in industry user journey that we really want to like focus on how that looks. Or that we had another proposal last year, for example, that was around content moderators and like how we can support those within the industry. So like, I think, we talk about the tech industry as a huge monolith, but there's actually sort of specific things like live streaming, for example, is very different from messaging. And so the more your project can really think about, and I hate to say the word user journey too much because it sounds really like tech speak, but I do think it's applicable here to say like, we want to look at like a specific, I think I don't want to say too specific because obviously I don't want to constrain your creativity, but I do think the more that you can kind of tether it to like a knowledge of how platforms work and operate, I think that does make it, much easier for someone to say, yeah, well, we operate a live streaming platform, so that might be relevant to us. We have deterrence messaging, or we're considering doing deterrence messaging. So we're really interested in what this, research has found. We are thinking about, another example from last year is we had 2 proposals around grooming detection and natural language processing. A lot of companies are thinking a lot about how, whether it's possible even to apply like ML models in this kind of setting. So I think that's, something that like really tethers to a user experience, a young person's experience, a potential offender's experience, or like a problem, that you think that the folks may be kind of working through right now.
Thank you so much. And I see I've been trying to answer some people one-to-one, and I see Miguel's also dropping in some answers to speak to some of the general questions we've been getting. I think one of the last questions that I've seen is a little bit around geographic scope and how researchers can focus the scope of the work, whether that's geographic or with different audiences. And so kind of if there's anything to speak a little bit to how we will evaluate the relevance of this research, whether it's at what geographic level, or what population that the research is focused on, et cetera.
I think, you know, this is a tricky one to answer because I think obviously it depends a bit on the context of the proposals. I do think there's certain populations that are probably like very well studied, you know, so like young people in the US or the UK, for example, have probably been disproportionately well represented in research in comparison to like the experiences of young people in the global South, for whom like the access to device use might be very different. The financial like constraints might be very different. I mean, obviously there's a huge amount of diversity in the US and the UK as well, but I do think that, you know, so we are looking to kind of learn stuff that we may not already know. That being said, I think there's obviously like interesting angles. I think one thing that I did notice in some of the proposals last year was there were some great proposals around populations that were understudied and like interesting, but then they were so highly specific that it was kind of hard to tell like what we might be able to apply to other contexts. And like, you know, remember that most of the platforms in the Tech Coalition, you know, we are global platforms, and we generally speaking will come up with global policies. So I think it is really interesting, for example, to look at the experience of like displaced. Like I think we had one proposal last year that was around, you know, a particular set of like internally displaced people in a particular country, which is fascinating. Actually, I think the issues around internally displaced people or forced migration are actually very highly relevant to this issue area, and certainly like especially around issues around trafficking, for example. But the proposal didn't really give us a sense of like what we might like learn from this very highly specific example that could be like a little bit more extrapolatable or like could help a platform create a global policy. And so in the one way, it was great because it was like, oh, this is a population that we don't know anything about. How wonderful. On the other hand, it was sort of like, what will we then do with that information, right? And so this is probably not giving you very clear feedback, but I think attention to thinking about like, if you are proposing research with an area that's really understudied, that's great, and that will be very gratefully received. But please do also pay some attention to like what you think will be the takeaways that might be applicable in other contexts as well. So I think, yeah, just kind of getting that balance.
That's super important. Thank you so much for sharing more about that, because I think that's not something that we shared too much on and when we went over the expressions of interest itself. I think the last question I think that would speak to some of the questions we've had throughout the session and would just be a good last piece to leave on is to talk a little bit about what we're hoping to see in the expression of interest specifically, because we have quite a comprehensive scoring criteria that really speaks to the full request for proposals. But for this expression of interest, it is a very short form that we're requiring. We have limited space. And so kind of what would we really want to see in those expressions of interest to make sure that we're able to evaluate them to extend invitations for full proposals?
Well, I think on some of the process stuff, you'll probably be better placed than I am to answer some of that, Natalie. But I do think I'll just speak for myself personally. I do think we reviewed a lot of applications last year, and there were some that were very memorable because they really made those clear links between this is a really interesting research question, this is what we hope to learn, and this is what we think, could be some of the implications of that. And I think the expression of interest will be brief, and obviously we want to try to create it to be not so burdensome. But I think if you can answer those three questions really well in the brief amount of space that you have available, that will actually, again, and I'll just sort of like repeat it because I'm not sure exactly how I said it a minute ago, but for my own clarity, what it is that you want to know, what you think you might find out, and how you think that could help drive implementation or a new way of thinking and questioning within the industry. I think if you can answer that stuff, and you should hopefully be able to answer a lot of that in a page or two, and obviously the how you're going to go about answering that, who you're going to work with, you know, the timeline, the budget, all that stuff will come later. But if you can answer those 3 questions in, you know, a couple paragraphs, I think that will really help us just understand what your vision is and get excited about it.
Thank you so much. And I think I'll ask Miguel and Kay as well if there's anything you can think of for this expression of interest in particular that we want to make sure we see in there, whether it's speaking to an eligibility criteria that's really important in, or one aspect that you think will be important for us as we assess those expression of interest.
Thanks, Natalie. Now, the only thing that I would like to mention is that English is mandatory for both for the submission of both the expression of interest and the call for proposals. It doesn't have to be like 100% like perfect in English. I mean that like we understand that we live in this is a global environment and we are going to receive different applications from all over the world. So we accept a decent level of English in all of our expression of interest and call for proposals. However, they all need to be in English. That's all from my side.
Thank you. Anything that you'd like to add, Kay, on the expression of interest phase in particular and what we're hoping to see?
No, not really. Just echoing everything that's been said here, and really do stressing the importance of the applicability and actionability piece for tech industry. Just really looking for that. So thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. No, thank you all very much. I think we hopefully in the expressions of interest, as Alicia said, it is a brief form to hopefully not make it so burdensome in this phase, but for us really to get a good idea of the ideas that you're having, what you're seeing is important and relevant in the space, where your research is taking you and your work is taking you. But really that clarity and specificity is really important. So that's the pieces that we'll really be looking for and able to evaluate better if we can invite a full proposal at this stage. So please, again, do feel free to reach out to the fund email, which Miguel has dropped into the chat, or submit questions via the FAQ form on our webpage. That webpage, the Tech Coalition Safe Online Research Fund webpage, is very comprehensive with details about this funding round. So hopefully you can find everything you need there, but we will be checking the FAQs up until the submission deadline so that we can hopefully respond to any questions or requests for clarification. And we really appreciate all of your interest in the research fund this year. We're very much looking forward to receiving the expressions of interest, and we hope you'll continue to share it widely within your networks as we have a little over a week left to receive expressions of interest. And we really appreciate your time joining today and asking questions. Thank you to all of the Tech Coalition and Safe Online and advisory group members that have joined as well. We're really glad that we could have this session, and we hope that it was helpful today. And we look forward to being in touch with you all. Thank you.